Okay. Hey, everybody. I never know when I'm actually live, so you just get me smiling at you for a second. First of all, I wanted to apologize to you guys for not being here last week and not letting you know I wasn't going to be here last week. It was kind of a last minute decision, to be honest. Um, I've gotten so busy with, I've got consultations that you guys are booking in now that you can do that. Let me see if I can add that. Here we go. Yeah, so I'm doing the private consultations and screenings now. You have 3 different options for that. You guys are booking in. I'm also in the middle of upgrading to a new software platform where it makes it easier for me and my team to communicate with you. So there's just a lot going on. But a lot of you were like, "Where are you? We're waiting for our live, and I wasn't here, and I'm so sorry." So I'm here today, and I hope you guys have some questions for me. I'm going to be looking over here at my other monitor. Uh, I want to start today with a question that somebody asked in the Facebook group. So I have a private Facebook group. You don't know about it, and it's really an awesome group. If you're not in there, come join us. We have neurotypical partners, neurodiverse partners, men, women, all walks of life, and we just have the best conversations in there between everybody. And I'm there to weigh in on it as well. And it's a very high integrity group. We don't bash, we don't vent, we learn from each other. I insist, and I've got this amazing group of moderators that help me in there. So anyway, we had a question this week, just earlier today, I think, um, from a member about diagnosis and about whether or not, how do you actually work on a relationship without having a diagnosis if you don't know for sure. And so I thought, I'm going to cover that in my live, but I actually have already covered this, and I have a video in my Spectrum Straight Talk library that, I don't want to just reinvent the wheel. I'm just going to play it for you guys here. And we're going to see if I can handle the tech part of this. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to hide this little thing here for a second. And then I'm going to, whoops, nope, that's not it. Here we go. So, okay, this is my Spectrum Straight Talk library, you guys, and you can see on the right-hand side a list of the videos, and that's just, in this category. There's almost 100 videos in here, and so it's in there. You can search by category, and this one is in the relationship clarity category. And we're going to see if this works. My assistant's on the helping produce today, and so she's going to let me know if you guys can hear the audio from this. So I'm going to turn it on, and we're going to listen up. Okay, Amber, can they hear the audio on this? Hold on. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pause. Can you guys hear the audio on this? Somebody tell me. I can't find my YouTube. Um, let's see. I need to see if you guys can hear. Whoops. Hold on. Let me stop sharing that with you guys. I need to just know if you guys can hear the audio on that. Hi. Okay. Somehow I told y'all I would screw up the tech on this. Somehow I closed out my screen. Don't know where it went. Um, Here we are. And let me see what your comments are. Oh, there's no audio. Well, shoot. Okay. All right. Well, I'll just answer it again. Thank you, Clara, for letting me know that. Okay. Well, now you know about the Spectrum Straight Talk Library. So basically, what I was saying there is that the label is really not that big of a deal. The diagnosis is not. It can be helpful. It's an important framework, but it's not something that you absolutely have to have in your relationship. Some For some people, getting that diagnosis is scary. It's uncomfortable. It feels like it's pathological. It feels like criticism. It feels like something's wrong with them. And so, a lot of folks who aren't really aware that they're on the spectrum, and uh, if they're approached by a partner uh, that they are on the spectrum, it feels like they're being told something's wrong with them. And so to go get a diagnosis is something they don't really want to do, because then they're really afraid. I've had so many folks on the spectrum who are on the spectrum and did finally accept it, and even some that were still in stages of um, not wanting to accept it. I've had so many people say, um, I didn't want to be the problem in the relationship. I was afraid that, if I do this, um, I'm going to, then my partner is going to be able to say, I'm the problem. Um, Thanks, McKenna. Yeah, I was trying to stream a video from my library, so I'm just answering the question instead. But so for a lot of folks, you don't necessarily have. So if you're a neurotypical partner and you think that your partner may be on the spectrum, I actually was in a relationship myself for about 2.5 years. This was after my divorce, and those of you who know me know that I was in a marriage to a man that was on the spectrum too, and we didn't know it till afterwards, way afterwards. He still doesn't accept that diagnosis, but I dated a man for a couple of years who I absolutely knew he was on the spectrum. Um, Hi, Moon Pie. Good to see you. So I absolutely knew this man was on the spectrum. He had a son who's now 22 and who was diagnosed on the spectrum, and another son who um, I could see was also on the spectrum, but a really different version. This is the thing. Um, Neurodiversity has so many different variable combinations of how it can present, that it can look really different from one person to the next. And so it can be difficult if you're not an expert in understanding the common thread. If you don't know how to see the common thread, a lot of people, providers, will miss the diagnosis. So this is another reason why I don't recommend that adults on the spectrum get a formal diagnosis unless you know for sure that the provider you're going to is has expertise in diagnosing adults on the spectrum, especially if you're a woman who may be neurodiverse. If you believe that you're on the spectrum, or you believe that your wife or your female partner is on the spectrum, women are even harder to spot if you don't know what you're looking for, because there's so many different combinations. But the common thread is the actual neurodiversity itself, that there is a diversion from what we consider neurotypical. So, can you, though? Let me go back to this relationship I was in. He and I talked about it a couple times. He was very opposed to the idea of being on the spectrum. And it was something that I just dropped. I didn't push that with him, because to do that, to try to force him to recognize it, was just going to put us in an antagonistic type of dynamic. I could absolutely know, and I did, that he was on the spectrum. And then it changed the way I interacted with him. It changed the way I perceived his behavior. And it just helped me. It gave me that framework. Now, that relationship ended because of a deal breaker that had nothing to do with autism. Our relationship was actually quite good. The autism itself didn't interfere with our ability to have a pretty good relationship. There were other issues, because as human beings, we are multi layered people, individuals. Neurodiversity is only one layer of who we are and of what our relationship is. We have values and personality traits and all these other things that make up who we are. So, to answer this question of how do we do a relationship without knowing for sure, you can pursue it and research it. And I've actually had neurotypical partners take my neurodiversity quiz and even do a consultation, a neurodiversity consultation appointment with me for about their partner. And so we go through the assessment and how the partner answered the questions on the neurodiversity screening assessment and why. And we talk about because they'll answer it as kind of project as a neurotypical partner. You can project. You can take the quiz as if you're your partner, and then we can go through all of that and look at why you answered the way you did. Look at what those behaviors are, and I can help. I help people understand what they're seeing. And this is how you can do it without your partner embracing it. And a lot of times I've had partners start to understand understand the dynamics so much more that their partner who may be neurodiverse starts to go, what are you doing? There's a difference here. I noticed that you're showing up differently in this relationship. Why? And that's when it can be brought up and say, well, I kind of understand this different framework. And I've had neurodiverse partners come on board literally a year later that a neurotypical partner first met me, found me, got on a call with me. I had one family who the wife was neurotypical. She worked with me in private coaching for an entire year before her husband decided he wanted to work with me too. And then I ended up doing family work with them because their daughters turned out to be on the spectrum too. And it was a cool thing to see that process. Not everybody comes around like that, but a lot do. Let me see what you guys are saying here. Hi, McKenna. So you're saying I was finding online help for my grown son and figured out that I ought to just turn that finger around, LOL. Wear that badge proudly now. You go. Yeah, so many people realize that they're neurodiverse, that they're on the spectrum when their child is diagnosed or when the differences are spotted in their kids and either the school sees it. And oh my gosh, I talk about this all the time, you guys. I've had parents come in and go, okay, I think this is me too. I've had grandparents come in when their grandchildren were diagnosed, and it doesn't really matter how you get there, but you now have that framework, and I'm sure that makes a huge difference in your world now. Hi, Glenn. Good to see you. Let's see. You're saying, let me resize my window here. All right, Glenn saying it's true that some autistic people instantly break up relationship and still be friends who are autistic. Is it true? Sorry. Is it true that some autistic people instantly break up relationships and still be friends who are autistic? I wanted to understand what you're saying. So, are you saying that people on the spectrum can break off a relationship and it's like a switch that's flipped? They're no longer in a relationship, but can flip that switch to being friends. I think that's what you're saying. And yes, I have definitely seen that. Folks on the spectrum oftentimes are very compartmentalized in how they define and categorize their relationships. And whereas neurotypical folks tend to have less of a hard boundary. So if there's ever been more than a friendship with someone, it's harder for someone who's neurotypical to flip that switch from we're in a relationship, a romantic relationship, to now we're friends. It's more like circles, like a Venn diagram where those circles overlap, where there's a friendship, there's a relationship, but there's some overlap there still, where there's still something left from the relationship. Whereas I've seen folks on the spectrum say, okay, we're not going to date anymore. We're not married anymore even, but we can be friends. And something that neurodiverse folks tend to be able to do um, in relationships to move, to flip that switch. Um, Moon pie, I love. You're making me hungry. Um, Thanks for your services. I clicked your links but can't open. Maybe it's me. Can I email you? Would like a consult. My relationship is complex and complicated. Yeah. I don't know what links you're talking about. If it's in the description or go to Amber. If you can, my assistant's name is Amber. If you can drop the link to the main website into the comment thread here. If you go to the main website, which is spectrumrelationships.com, um, there's a link there to book a consultation. So I hope that some of my links are not broken. Yeah, Clara's saying so. Her kid was diagnosed, and then she was too 7 months later. Yep, it happens, and it does help a lot, doesn't it? That framework is so important, especially if you just really haven't understood what there is that's different. That's what neurodiverse. It's about a difference. Um, okay. Well, before I move on, let me just thanks, Amber. Um, a question came up among some colleagues of mine about the term neurodiverse and neurodivergent. And by the way, I'm using that terminology more and more. And I named my coaching program Spectrum Relationships, referring to the autism spectrum, because there's so many different uses of the term. Some people prefer autism. Some people who are older, in particular, my generation, I'm getting old, remember the Asperger's, the term Asperger's, and it's kind of stuck in our minds of to use that term. And then there's a lot of controversy about the term Asperger's because of Hans Asperger, who was politically had some things that people really don't like. He was not a nice person. But neurodiverse and neurodivergent, this question came up of, which is more, seems to describe, it'd be a better descriptor. And this was a bunch of neurotypical folks. We were talking about this, and we were really looking at the definitions, and it sort of looked like neurodiverse seemed to fit a little more than neurodivergent. But I asked my daughter, who's 18, and she's on the spectrum. She uses the word neurodivergent, and I asked her why. And I thought it was very interesting. Her answer was that neurodivergent ends in a consonant sound, and neurodiverse ends in a vowel sound. And she said neurodivergent had more closure, more boundary, and it was more succinct. And she said the word neurodiverse makes her throat feel icky. And I was just fascinated by this because here I was, neurotypical, looking at the definition, and she's like, well, Mom, the definitions are almost the same, really. And she's like, but it just feels like a more hard line boundary to use the word neurodivergent. And I thought, if that's not just a prime example right there of how we actually approach language differently, and how, because it wouldn't have ever occurred to me that those two words end in different sounds. It just never would have occurred to me, but that was the criteria for her. I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts on that. Okay, so Moon Pie, you're saying if an ND person thinks they're NT, wouldn't they see an NT person as ND? LMNOP. There's so many. So, okay. So what you're saying is if someone who's neurodiverse thinks they're neurotypical, so they think that their perspective, their brain, how they do work, how they think, their thought process is the typical. Wouldn't they think that the neurotypical person is the one that's different? So yeah, that happens a lot. So folks on the spectrum struggle with what's called theory of mind. It's a complicated, fancy term. Another term is cognitive empathy. What this means, it's about perspective and point of view. So someone who is on the spectrum oftentimes struggles to recognize that there is another point of view, another alternative perspective. And so someone who doesn't realize they're neurodiverse, they're going to be more likely to see their perspective, their point of view, their preferences their way of going about things as being the norm, and may be at risk of over exaggerating how many other people think the same as them, do things the same as them. On the flip side, in regarding certain issues, on the flip side, there are plenty of people who are neurodiverse that realize there are so many other people that they're different. They don't know why, but that they're different, and they'll often think that the way they are is better, because we kind of all do, you guys. I mean, we are who we are, and we do think of ourselves as, we believe what we believe, and are who we are for a reason. But folks who are neurodiverse sometimes forget that being different, doing things differently, is legit, is still very legit and valid. So I think that maybe answered your question, Moon Pie. Clara's saying, I'm still friends with all exes except the ones I lost touch. So, yeah, you are just referring to that switch that can be flipped. It's a pretty common thing. Okay, I have another question while I'm waiting on you guys. If you have any other questions here, let me make sure I don't miss anything. Hi, nice to see you again, too. Okay. What, you guys, I've lost all my. Here we go. I'm so discombobulated today. Y'all are making me work during the week, and I'm all stressed out here. No, not really. Okay. So another question. This is actually really a good question that someone submitted to our email address. She says, I'm wondering if you have any information on social pragmatic communication disorder, and what are your thoughts on it? It's a mouthful, and it's social. Sometimes it's called social communication disorder, social pragmatic communication disorder. So what this is, it's a fairly new diagnosis that's in the DSM-5, which stands for Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, 5th edition. And this is the diagnostic book, for the psychological community. And so basically, any kind of diagnosis that you can get that is not just a medical diagnosis, but is related to behavioral health, mental health, emotional health, psychology. These diagnoses are listed in here, and then the criteria for who can be diagnosed is broken down. And so autism's in there, and that's why, Asperger's got changed over to autism mild. So this is a fairly new one, and it refers specifically to the verbal aspect of language communication. Now, this is absolutely one of the features of individuals who are diagnosed as autistic, as neurodiverse. It has to do with the ability to, I talk a lot here about the tennis match. I use the tennis match analogy, where when a conversation starts, one person hits the ball, the other person hits it back, and it's this conversation back and forth. Someone who's neurodiverse and has trouble with this social communication, with the pragmatics, meaning the back and forth, is going to struggle with knowing when it's their turn to hit the ball, or they're going to have trouble knowing if someone wants to play. Do I hit a ball? Do I start a conversation here? Or, okay, someone said something back to me, but are they expecting a response? Or I didn't know I was supposed to respond. Oh, that they watched the ball go right by and say, oh, that was a great shot. Oh, you wanted to hear from me. This happens in texting a lot. So a lot of folks on the spectrum don't like to text because they don't know if a response is expected. And so this is the pragmatics. Now, there's still a little bit of confusion in the psychological community about whether or not this is a truly standalone diagnosis in and of itself. Here's the thing. There are several aspects to neurodiversity that can exist and someone not quite meet criteria for autism. One of the others is sensory processing disorder. So pretty much everybody who is diagnosed on the spectrum as neurodiverse or as autistic is going to have a degree of sensory processing difficulties. So, this is how our brain receives input, sensory input, processes it, interprets it, and makes sense of it. But not everybody who has sensory processing difficulties is on the spectrum. Not everybody meets criteria for being autistic. So it's similar with social pragmatics, with social communication disorder. It's being diagnosed mostly in children, but it carries on through into adulthood. So we are seeing that there are certain traits, characteristics of what, when you put them all together, we call it autism. There are certain traits that people can have, like sensory processing disorder. Someone can have social communication disorder where they struggle with that back and forth aspect of communication. They struggle with understanding innuendo and figurative language. They struggle with phrasing, and like my daughter, who is on the spectrum, so she has social pragmatic issues. She used to use pronouns wrong. Well, that's a hot topic, isn't it? Well, when she was little, she would say, and when I mean it, she would use it grammatically incorrectly. So instead of saying, Mom, look at her, if we were at a parade one time and this real pretty princess was going by, and she said, instead of saying, Mom, look at her, she said, Mom, look at she. Look at she. It's an improper use of grammar. She used to get her words completely out of order, and the speech therapist called it word salad, because it's like you took a sentence. This is when she was about 3. You took a sentence and took the words and just scrambled them up, and then they came out, and so they were all in the wrong order. And as her mom and her dad as well, we had to kind of do a word scramble to figure out what she was trying to say. So these are the types of things that we can see in individuals who don't meet criteria for autism. That this can exist over here kind of on its own or with some other features, but we have to have boom, 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 boom to actually, for it to meet the criteria for autism itself. Okay, you guys are chatting over here. Let me see what you're saying. Okay, so McKenna, you were referring back to the divergent. You said divergent resonates with me as growing and changing. Diverse feels done to me, yet still gifted, if that makes sense. So are you saying that you prefer then divergent because it feels like it's a growing and changing and evolving thing, whereas neurodiverse feels like it's what you are? I think that's what you're saying. It's what you are. You are neurodiverse. That actually makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, so then I've got some, Deanne, hi, good to see you. You're saying you have autism and you're having trouble making friends and finding a girlfriend. Yeah, so this is part of the social dynamics. It can be very difficult for someone who's on the spectrum to make that's a hallmark criteria, that difficulty making friends and dating. Dating is a big challenge for folks on the spectrum because those social dynamics of how to approach what others are expecting in the interactions are not always well understood. So yeah, that's a common issue. And you're also saying you have a learning disability as well as autism, and a lot of times those learning disabilities do end up kind of falling under the umbrella of autism. I have people come to me all the time that have this long list of diagnoses like OCD and anxiety and learning disability and sensory issues and panic disorder, and really pretty much all of that falls under the autism umbrella. They aren't really, what's happened is over time people get these different diagnoses and trying to figure out what's going on, and then whoever diagnoses them with autism, or if somebody figures out they're on the spectrum, they don't realize that all these other diagnoses actually are part of the autism. Okay, so McKenna's saying it's a nuance. Okay, yeah. Thank you for giving me your feedback on that. Hi Ben, good to see you. You said I realized that tennis match analogy works, as I'm not that great at tennis either. That's funny. But texting is much easier as it provides a time for processing before responding. Yeah. Yeah, so see that's at the beginning of the call I said there's so many different variations of what neurodiversity and autism looks like. And that's one of them. Some people prefer the texting because you can read, process, interpret, read, interpret, process before a response, which an in-person interaction is more, it's immediate, got to respond now. So some people do prefer the texting, others not so much because and oftentimes it's because they've had some uncomfortable um, disagreements, or there's been someone in their life that really railed them for not responding like they should, and gotten really angry with them, and they've just kind of like, okay, I'm not doing that. I'm not going there because someone's been really upset with me when I didn't know they wanted me to respond. Let's see. McKenna's saying, I love to scramble words as a game, chopping, flipping, reattaching, making up funny stories. That's interesting. Um, Moon Pie saying it's like his answers or communication rarely fit the context. Okay, this is where we use language so differently that it probably fits perfectly to him. It makes sense to him what he's saying, and his thinking may have gone. These if then, like, I'm not going to go there. For him, what you said or whatever the context is led his brain to think of this and then think of this and then think of this, and so then he comments and responds, whereas you're over here not understanding. You're missing all those steps, so he may have gone from here to here to here to here in his mind, and then he may relate the context to something else that doesn't make sense to someone who's neurotypical. Whereas the way those of us who are neurotypical, uh, understand, this comment fits here. To someone who's neurodiverse, it may not make sense. We truly don't process language and communication the same. And it's so confusing. And that's why I've got the communication program, you guys. I'm always talking about it here, I'm not just trying to sell you guys something. It is so important to learn how to dissect your interactions and what you're bringing to those conversations. What is it that's influencing how you're talking, what you've said to your partner, what you've heard your partner say, how you interpret that meaning, the narrative you have about whatever you've interacted. Because if you're not speaking the same language, then you're going to misunderstand each other all the time. And you need to learn how to do that. Hey, Nathan, better late than never. Um, okay, so McKenna assessed verbal genius at 10. Lost a few of those brain cells now. So that's part of why you love to play around with words. So words are it's like a special interest for you then. Language and words and using them, you like to flip them around, move them around. Verbal genius at age 10, that's a special interest for you, it sounds like. Am I right? Hi, LJ, good to see you. You said my Aspie and I'm the NT, were friends for 15 years before our relationship for the last 5.5 years. He seems to have resistance or blocks to normal relationship behaviors and acts more like a friend. Yeah, so this comes down to our definitions and expectations of what a relationship actually is. What does that mean? And you used the word normal. So you said he has resistance or blocks to normal relationship behaviors. So what is normal to you, I have learned, by the way, that whether we're neurotypical or not, what we see as normal oftentimes is really not what the rest of the world sees as normal. And I'm not saying that you're off base here. You may not be, but it's really important for us to stop, and it's so helpful to stop and find out what, first of all, to ask ourselves, where did we get the idea of what's normal? Where does that come from? And why do we believe whatever we believe about what's normal? Because sometimes when we stop and think about that, and we have to ask ourselves, why do I believe this is normal? And is it really normal? Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But each of you in a partnership has a definition of what a relationship is, and your definitions may be really different. Um, a definition of a romantic relationship, a definition of being a parent, a definition of uh, being a friend, of any kind of relationship. We all have different like roles and rules and structure to it. And even neurotypical couples struggle with this because we come from different cultural backgrounds. We come from different parts of the country. We've been exposed to different socioeconomic um, levels that may influence how relationships are seen and done. And we come from different religious backgrounds. All of that influences what we see as normal. And so it's really helpful to have a conversation about what your expectations and preferences are in a relationship, and maybe find out what his are. What does he see as being normal in a relationship? Um, after I've told this story before, after I got married, I didn't know that my husband, we didn't know anything. This was like 1997. And I still tell this story because it made such a huge impact. My ex-husband had been very romantic when we courted. He brought me flowers and wrote me notes, and I now know he had this script for what dating was, and he loved it. He lived up to that role. But we got married, and about 3 months down the road, I noticed he wasn't doing some of those things anymore, and we were still newlyweds. And I asked him one day, I was like, "Why don't you bring me flowers anymore?" And we were in the car, and I can remember exactly where we were driving down the road. And he stopped, he kind of looked over at me, and he's like, "I didn't think you wanted flowers anymore." And at the time, I was so hurt by that because I thought, why in the world would I not want flowers from you? And he was just aghast. He was just like, "Why would you want flowers anymore?" And I'm like, "Why wouldn't I want flowers anymore? I'm your wife." And he's like, "Yeah, but we're married now." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but don't you still love me?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I still love you, but what does flowers have to do with that?" And I was so hurt by that. But now I understand that his definition, his role, it was flowers was a dating thing to do. It wasn't a married thing to do. But there was this huge miscommunication, and I felt very hurt, and we didn't know how to figure out that interaction, and it was like this sore spot between us for the longest time. um okay, Nathan's saying, oh wait, you guys are talking over here. So Moonpie, yeah, you're saying, so you spend copious amounts of time decoding his meanings. That's very important, actually. And you're saying when he calls, it's usually about stocks or weather or politics. So those sounds like some safe topics for him that he understands. Probably doesn't understand. It's hard for men, especially who are on the spectrum, who are neurodiverse, to have relationship and emotion conversations. That is like danger zone for them. So they're going to steer clear of that a lot of times. Um, Oh, thank you, Nathan. It's good to sell things. You have a good product. Yeah. Well, I think it's good because I see so many people I see their lives changing when they learn how to do this communication program. And yeah, it helps me make a living so I can keep doing this with you guys. So thank you, Nathan. Um, LJ says, we only see each other once a week after 5.5 years. I guess I feel that is not what a relationship is after that time. Okay, this is important too. So, in my communication program that I was just plugging, that Nathan told me I could plug, one of the things that we look at is in the very first step, which is free, you guys, it's the Battle Buster step, is I teach you how to assess what's truly important to you, what is worth a conversation, what's worth talking about. Some things that we feel we're not getting what we want in our relationship. Sometimes it's about picking our battles. We cannot fight every single battle, but we have to figure out what is truly important to us. And in this Battle Busters system, I teach you to ask yourself two questions. And one is, how important is this to me? And number two is, how much is this impacting my life? And then we rate that on a scale. And when it's important to know what's a deal breaker and what's just like a wish that you really wish that your husband would, hug you more. How important is that, and how much is it impacting your life? Versus what LJ is saying, seeing someone once a week. I would encourage you to ask yourself, how important is this to you? And how much is it impacting your life? I would say for you, I can't speak for you. Some people would actually be okay with that setup, but you have the right to choose what you're okay with and what you need to have. We all have the right to have our own values and preferences and needs, and to know and to decide for ourselves what is truly important, what really is impacting our life, to determine what those deal breakers are. So if for you, only seeing a man once a week is not something that you can do, if that's a deal breaker for you, that's okay. It's everybody's different, and everybody, and again, going back to what's normal, some people actually have pretty solid relationships like that. Some people date, love each other, love spending time together, but really need their separate space. Some people, I was talking to somebody the other day who they've decided to live in separate houses on like the same property. They have houses side by side, his and hers houses. Now, not everybody can afford that, but that really works for them, and they like it, and it makes their relationship great. But if some one of them were to say, well, that's not normal, that's not normal. That's where we have to stop and look at, well, there's no such thing as normal in a lot of ways, but it is totally fine for one of those individuals to say, it's not what I want. It's a deal breaker for me, and I matter to me. The Battle Busters, by the way, is you can get to it on the website. Amber put the website in the comments here. It's under Crack the Communication Code. That's my 5-step communication program. Crack the Communication Code, and that first step is free, you guys. It's free. McKenna's saying typical behavior can seem like a waste of time and energy. Why do that? Yeah, see, there you go. So someone who's neurodiverse thinks that those of us who are neurotypical waste a lot of time and energy. And who's right? I don't know. You're not necessarily right. I'm not right. But that's your perspective. And that's, everybody's perspective is legit, you guys. Nathan says normal is one way of benchmarking or seeing how you compare to others. Yeah, that's exactly right. The term normal, when we look at statistics, what is the most typical statistically way of X, of the way people do X or handle whatever. Um, so but really, statistics are just numbers. And when you're in a relationship, when when people come to me for my comprehensive relationship evaluation, so basically this is like the Mac Daddy consultation you can do with me, where we look at neurodiversity. It's a neurodiversity screening, but it's also where we really look closely at your relationship. And I've got this really long interview assessment that you do, and you get this long, like 20-page report, and we go over it and blah, blah, blah. But I have both individuals take my neurodiversity screening quiz. Well, it's not mine, it's developed at Cambridge, but that's the one I use. The reason I do that is I don't want to just test one person, whoever's suspected to be not neurodiverse. Okay, that gives me information about his or her score, but I want to know where both of you score, because then that tells me neurodiversity is a spectrum. That tells me where you both are, so I can talk to you about how far apart or how close together you are. If one of you scores a 45, which is really high, that's really, really neurodiverse or neurodivergent, um, and the other one scores an 8, you guys are really far apart in how you process the world and language. But sometimes I have people who score 32, which is like right at the cutoff of pretty positive you're on the spectrum. And somebody else who scored like 22, which is, you have a few traits actually, but not real, it's possible. So you're 22 and 32, you're only 10 points apart. So that means you're going to have a lot fewer differences. And then that helps me help you to understand your whole relationship better. So it's everything's relative, you guys. What's normal is it's relative. Okay. Moon Pie saying, does love attachment theory apply to neurodiverse relationships? Yes, attachment theory does apply because it's a different measure. And so attachment theory, is about being securely attached, insecurely attached, which can be anxious or avoidant. And so we can have, I was saying earlier that neurodiversity is only one layer of who we are as human beings. Our attachment style is another layer. And we can have a different attachment style in different relationships. So we can be securely attached in one and very insecurely attached in another. So it's not like we have a attachment style that's like we wear as a hat and that's what we are. It really depends on the relationship. That's one layer of our relationship. Our personality is another layer. Um, our genetics, our DNA. I mean, we've got all these different, our past, our history, all those different layers. Nathan said it's still good to court your wife. I think so too. I agree. Claire said, just saw the webinar one of communication, crack the code this weekend, and it's awesome. Being aware of all we bring to the conversation and the way to interact makes a huge difference. And you meant the Battle Buster system, yeah. And so there's Battle Buster, and then step 2, and that may be the one you're talking about, I'm not sure, is it's about understanding conflict, because conflict is not really what people think it is. And so I go into what it is and then introduce you to these 4 stages of communication that are really important to learn how to break them down so that you can understand where the breakdown is happening. And you'll look at all the theories that focus on communication, typically just focus on my stage 2, what I call stage 2, which is how we interact. And that's important, but it misses so much of the other parts of our communication. So we can't just focus on that. Moon Pie says, are you able to help 2 NDs in a relationship? Yeah, I actually have had quite a few folks come to me that were both on the spectrum. And sometimes I've had a couple come to me where one person is known to be on the spectrum or suspected, and then I've identified the other person as also being on the spectrum, because it kind of jumps off the page at me, you guys. I can spot it a mile away. And so then then we have a framework for this relationship as two neurodiverse people. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, McKenna's saying my ex traveled for work a lot. It wasn't so bad. See, that's what I'm talking about. What's normal and good for one is not necessarily normal and good for the next. Nathan's saying, I guess it's normal for them, and that's what matters. Yeah. LJ, you're welcome. Um, so Moon Pie, you're saying, when I met him, one of his first statements was he didn't want me to think he was weird. Oh, gosh. You said I've been receiving temperament counseling, melancholic, sanguine, supine, choleric, and phlegmatic, helpful as a layer. Wow, those are a lot of words. Um, so didn't want you to think he was weird. So that tells me right now, in my communication model, stage one is what we bring to it. So what we bring to it, every interaction, is our selves, our personal history, our experiences. And one of the things he's obviously bringing to this is that people have thought he was weird. And maybe he thought he was weird. And his fear, he's also bringing fear that you're going to think he's weird. And what does that typically mean? That may mean that people who think I'm weird leave. So that's an important thing to know in what he's bringing to all of his interactions with you. This fear that you're going to think he's weird. And so he may adjust. He may not be as authentic with you. And then partners get mad because I'm not saying you've done this, but I know partners are like, why is he lying to me? And a lot of folks on the spectrum aren't great at lying at all. It's very difficult. But they can still be inauthentic. They can withhold information, not really tell you what he's thinking for fear of what you're going to say. And then neurotypical partners get really upset because they feel like their partner is not being honest and genuine, when really it's coming from a place of fear that if I tell you what I'm really thinking, what are you going to think of me? So it's so helpful to start unpackaging all this to understand it. And once you start to understand it, then it really changes up your whole meaning that you take from your interactions, that narrative that you have about what's happened between you, the things that have been said between you, and your whole narrative of your relationship. Nathan says, what's the difference between a special interest and a passion? Is it being able to pursue such passions help have less intense interests? I'm thinking of a weather obsession and meteorology career and stockbroker for someone who enjoyed investing. Okay, so the difference between a special interest and a passion, really, it can be the same. It's not necessarily a difference, but a passion is something that somebody really loves, really enjoys. It's something they like to do, but if they aren't able to pursue it for some reason for a period of time, it's not particularly bothersome to them. Whereas a special interest is usually people who have special interests, or when there's a special interest, there's a need, like a drive to engage in that special interest, to learn. You're talking about weather, to learn everything you can know about weather, to study the weather, to look at the weather app, to go outside and see if it's really doing what it says it was going to do, to know what the radar means, know how to read the radar, become a storm spotter. I am passionate about weather. I'm actually a certified storm spotter for the National Weather Service, so I know what it looks like on the radar if there's a tornado coming. But it's not something that I do constantly. It's not something I engage in all the time. And if I don't have a chance to, I don't even look at the weather on my phone some days. But it's interesting to me. So that's a passion. But a special interest, someone with a special interest is kind of compelled to be engaged in it. And those can change, actually. Special interests can change. Someone can just dive in and everything. And a lot of times special interests will be pursued at the expense of other responsibilities, because it's like the brain perseverates. This is a term that we use It's a criteria. It's one of the things that we see in autism. Perseveration is when we get stuck on something and we get stuck on it, and it's hard to let go, and we're so stuck on it that we miss we forget about other important things that are going on in our lives. So a special interest for someone on the spectrum can really cause problems, can be problematic because of that. It's like an obsession, really, with the special interest at the expense of other responsibilities and relationship interactions, even. Um, Moon Pie, you're saying, will you please help us? You're my only hope. Yes, you've coined it. Oh my God, you're the first. I'd love to help you. So please find your way over to the website, spectrumrelationships.com, and book a consultation with me there, and we'll get you guys started. Um, Nathan says, you cannot be authentic if you don't feel like you can be vulnerable. Yeah, exactly. Being authentic requires safety, we have to feel safe. Vulnerable, we have to be able to be vulnerable in order to be authentic, and otherwise we're just not gonna, we're not gonna share what we really think. um, Glenn, you said last time I've asked you a question about a girl who was from New York. Maybe I would move to New York someday to date the girl who's autistic. Is it possible to move to a new city to date a girl? You know, yeah, but I'm not a fan of long distance relationships. And you're saying, well, I would move to her. But that's a big thing, to move to a different city, to move to a different town before knowing if you're compatible, if there's actually a relationship to be had. I don't recommend that anybody, y'all know, here's my Southern coming out. If you've been following me, you know that I'm not a big fan of long distance relationships because of that whole authenticity piece. It's so much easier not to be ourselves when we're long distance, and to just present an image that um, it's not necessarily about being fake, but it's easier to um, be who someone maybe we think they want us to be, and just not really show up as our true selves. And even if we do show up as our true selves, it's really impossible to truly know if you're compatible until you spend a lot of time together. And very few, I mean, some people have made it work, but very few relationships do very well that pretty much were the whole relationship was long distance. And of course, it depends on the individual. And I know some of you are going to go, oh my gosh, we did it. And I'm happy for you. But I, as a relationship coach, really, I tend to caution against that type of thing. Clara's saying special interest, something you got to do to recharge. Right. It's like a compulsion. Yeah. All right. That's all my questions, you guys. Oh, you said mine has been long distance 9 years. So my question for that would be, how far apart are you guys, and how often do you spend time together, and have you spent chunks of time together? Because long distance, well, we've got military people who are in relationships that are long distance, but there needs to be some time together for a long period, like, so for a couple of weeks or a month. A couple of weeks may not even be long enough, but it's important to spend some longer chunks of time together to see how you do, how you don't even sometimes know what people are doing in their downtime when you're not nearby. So again, I'm not going to say that none of them work, but it's harder. It's so much harder. And neurodiverse relationships are hard already because you're speaking those different languages. You're coming from different brain processes, and it's harder, but not impossible. So Moon Pie, I won't know who you are because I'm sure you're not going to book with me as Moon Pie, but make sure you tell me if you book a consultation. Make sure you tell me you met me here and we were chatting. So let's see if we can help you guys out. Thank you guys for being here today, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Don't forget, it's 2 weeks. Um, and also, I tried to show you a video from my Spectrum Straight Talk library earlier, but I couldn't get the audio to work. So, just so you know, I have this library. It's like $45. It's not, that's one time payment of $45, and it's about 100 videos of me talking, answering questions. And some of them are full lives that I did on other platforms, not here, that aren't here on YouTube. And then some of them we've broken them down into like 3-second question and answer videos that you can search on. So it's a great resource for you guys. All right. I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, see you around in the Facebook group if you're not in there. And if you have any questions for me or my staff, just send us an email at support@spectrumrelationships.com, and we'll answer it the best we can. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.